Welcome to another episode of TECcast. In this episode, I sat down with Reverend Aaron Rathbun, who, in addition to serving as our director of spiritual life and a Protestant chaplain, teaches contemporary issues and peace and justice in the HPRSS department, and lives and advises in the Homestead dormitory, where he's the head of house. After settling into the studio with an obligatory guitar jam, we dove right in and covered a ton of ground. Reverend Aaron's deep interests in both spirituality and technology made the ideal guest for this podcast. In the days leading up to our recording, we both listened to a conversation between Ken Wilber and Kevin Kelly titled Technology, Evolution, and God, which we've linked in the show notes and which ultimately inspired some of the threads we explored in this podcast. We discussed Aaron's teaching and spiritual life journey and the various ways technology has impacted his professional roles, the spiritual dimensions of living in an always-on society, technology as an evolutionary force, the basics of integral theory and spiral dynamics, the nuances of integrating meditation and contemplation into education, using postmodern critiques of modernity to rediscover ancient wisdom. And like we do every episode, Aaron shared some of his favorite music with us. Enjoy. Okay, I just hit record.
Oh, no.
You actually type on Dvorak?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, can
so
you
watch? Yeah, I'll show you.
That's amazing. I was just talking about that with somebody. I was like, hey, did you know that they designed QWERTY keyboards to slow you down?
So
typing,
try
so
to
stop jamming the.
Try to give it a whirl, and yeah.
Oh my, I can't.
Exactly.
And this is why I told the person who was asking about it. I was like, well, I decided to just stop learning it because. Am I going to put a skin on it?
I know. So I worked at a keyboard. I worked at a computer, right? And then I'm a gamer. I'm on my PC all the time. And so I was getting wrist pain. And my wrists were starting to hurt. So I started looking into it and repetitive stress, blah, blah, blah. So one of the things I suggest is a different keyboard. But I was like so invested in a normal keyboard. I could type insanely fast, right? But I switched. I decided I printed out a Dvorak piece of paper, taped it to my monitor, switched Windows and Mac both have it built in where you can switch to Dvorak, even though it's a physical QWERTY keyboard. And I started just baby steps learning, and it took weeks of learning and looking at my screen, not looking down at the keyboard, and I could touch type before anyway. But so there it is. And I had actually. Wow. A student who, my kids found out, what, you don't type on QWERTY, you type on this weird thing, Dvorak. They're all blown away. And I guess there's some website called Type Monkey or something. And so one of the students, Raghav, he was obsessed with it. He was always trying to do speed drills and words per minute and it has all these settings and so they were like, all right, try it out, do it. And I just smashed it, just destroy. And they're like, what? And they kept, okay, now switch to this setting. Okay, now do it on this setting. Now do the no vowel setting or whatever. And just.
And that was all specifically with Dvorak?
Yeah, all Dvorak. Yeah. Anyway, fun little excursus.
Oh, yeah. Did you know the origins of why we have QWERTY keyboards?
The typewriter, right? And salespersons. Right? So, well, you tell me. I've read this. I don't know if it's true. But the typewriter, the original, speaking of technology, right, had those hammer mechanisms where when you hit the keys, it put the hammer ink against the paper. And in order to make sure the hammers didn't hit one another and get jammed, they had to spread the keys out inefficiently, right, to maximize inefficiency. So that you couldn't type lightning fast, so that these hammers wouldn't smack each other and jam up. Is that the story you've heard?
That's what I have heard.
Yeah. And then and additionally, as a piece of related trivia, the longest single word that can be typed on a QWERTY keyboard in one line is the word typewriter. Which, whether this is true or urban legend. It was because the door-to-door typewriter salesman would go around and they're trying to sell this thing. And so to do a demonstration, they might not themselves be a typist, but they would set it down and then type out the word typewriter, and it was all on one line, so it would be really easy and fast, and they wouldn't have to hunt and peck, as they say. But anyway, yeah, too funny.
Yeah, I had some friends in college who were really hardcore about properly learning Dvorak, and I was like philosophically signed on with the idea. It's like, well, of course, I don't want to be stuck with this intentionally inefficient way of typing.
Right.
But eventually, I just submitted to the QWERTY overlords.
The hegemony. So, they say 70% of your typing on a QWERTY is not on the home row.
Wow.
And Dvorak, it's the reverse. 70% of all typing is on the home row. So, and I don't know, maybe you already know this, but A, all the most used keys are on the home row, which goes without saying. But then also B, it alternates. The most used vowels are on the left hand, and the most used consonants are on the right hand. So it's always alternating as well.
That was the number one thing I remember learning, is that it would alternate which hand you're using more consistently.
Right.
Yeah. I'm glad we just started off with
this
that nugget.
random.
I had no idea of. Well, of course, I should have pegged you. If there's anyone who might have learned Dvorak,
and I've been using it for over maybe 15 years now.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's just baked in. Can you do QWERTY if you had to?
I can.
It's like another language. Like
exactly,
you just
but it's slower now. When I first was learning Dvorak was slow. QWERTY was fast. And I could switch back and forth, and it's fine. But I've used it so long now that when I switch back to QWERTY, it's a little bit of this is, I'm definitely not as fast as I used to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, maybe we'll leave that in to start. Maybe splice it in later. We'll see.
Right.
But either way, let's give an official welcome to the one and only Director of Spiritual Life, Reverend Aaron Rathbun. Thanks for joining us for the spring edition.
Good to be here.
TECcast.
Excited to be here.
Great to have you. It's funny, we have had multiple conversations through the year. Early on, it planted the seed about, hey, let's do this podcast. And then there's been several conversations where we're like, wait. Let's save this for the podcast.
True. We have multiple instances where we'd be like, we just happen upon each other while we're crossing, a green here or there. Yeah, or I'm walking Yoshi, and then we just start riffing on some themes, and then we end up talking for like 40 minutes or something, and then, oh shoot, we gotta stop. We gotta save this for the podcast. Yeah,
eventually, we learned to just not just save it for the podcast.
Right.
You can always.
We'll always circle back.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. But I'm so glad to have you in the building, because you do seem to occupy the particular intersection that we're interested in exploring here.
Yes.
Explicitly and intentionally looking at technology, education, and contemplation altogether, which some people might have an immediate reaction of like, wait, well, how do and why would you ever want those things to go?
Right. Isn't
together?
this oil and water or something, right?
Right. So I guess on that note, if I recall correctly, even before coming to Choate, a lot of your life has kind of been at this intersection. So why don't we kick it off by you telling us about your journey with all those three things and what has led you here today?
Yes. So cool. Absolutely. Well, yes, as you mentioned, my formal title is Director of Spiritual Life, and I wear a couple different hats related to that. In the Director of Spiritual Life side of things, I oversee the ministry functions here on campus between the Jewish chaplain, the Muslim chaplain. We have different traditions represented on campus, so making sure that we have Ramadan and Passover and the different traditions that our students celebrate coming from an international, global context. And then in addition to that, I myself serve as the Protestant chaplain, so I myself belong to the Christian tradition, and particularly Protestant, and then also teach. And so that's where the teaching side comes in, and pedagogy related to these things. And so I teach here in the HPRSS department, and I teach philosophy and world religions type themes. And then as far as technology stuff, yes, I myself have just always been an avid technophile generally. Even before having come to Choate, in one of the ministry functions that I ran was adjacent to some of these things, creating community spaces for people to come and be comfortable, build relationships, and so on. And I created that in the form of an esports club. And so students, young people could come. We did Super Smash Bros. Tournaments, League of Legends tournaments, Hearthstone tournaments. Also did intercollegiate stuff with Yale, University of New Haven, Sacred Heart University. Lots of cool stuff in that vein. And we live streamed and all that kind of stuff.
You had
Twitch
account going?
Had Twitch going, absolutely. It was lots of fun. And we ran those very consistently, bi-weekly events, LAN events, so in-person events with brackets with 50 people in it, double elimination going through. So lots of fun. That's, of course, the gamer side of me. And then I also, like I said, just technophile generally. I've been a lifelong dabbler in these things. So, but anyway, and then, of course, just thinking deeply about these things, which is your purpose and goal, is to think deeply about how these things interconnect and how they form and shape us and orient us, and the way that technology does do that as human persons and how we interact with the world and orient ourselves. So anyway, it's something that I've kind of inhabited this interesting space between. My undergrad studies were in philosophy. We had to study a lot of these types of themes. My graduate studies, that's what brought me out to Connecticut, was coming to Yale Divinity School. So I focused my own studies in the field of ethics, particularly in my own tradition of Christianity and Christian ethics. But once again, how we relate to the world and how we relate to one another and our environment and so on and so forth. So yeah, super cool. It was fun to study the intersection of all these different, otherwise disparate themes.
Right. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. What you said at the end there reminded me of, I know we both have watched The Social Dilemma.
Ah, yes.
And
which I use in my classroom.
Right. Same.
Yes.
Yeah. And that seems to be a great example of how the technological ecosystem that we have to interact with, how it affects our epistemological processes, which also affect our ethical discourses.
Sure.
And also affect our metaphysical relationships to our deeper selves and everything. So all the three branches of philosophy, quote unquote, are all fundamentally interconnected in
all
themselves.
Interconnected.
And this technology stuff that's out there that a lot of people understandably like to try to kind of keep at arm's length and say, oh, well, that's just like tech stuff. Oh, that's like not human, or that's not related to like my interests in philosophy or whatever. We're in this situation today where we can't really take that stance.
That's right. That's right. Like, these technological devices have become the medium through which we interface with reality in so many ways, right? Like, and not only so communications, right? Not only from a functional way, but like you said, an epistemological way. The way that we view and see the world in so many cases is through this medium of our smartphones and our devices. And so absolutely.
Yeah. So with kind of both of your roles here at Show, how does technology play into, and how do you utilize it in the spiritual life role and also kind of in the classroom?
Yes, good question. The classroom more so. In the spiritual life role, so I particularly am more in the weeds with the students in Christian fellowship. And so in Christian fellowship, students come from different backgrounds. We have students who are Lutheran, Presbyterian, Episcopalian, non-denominational, Pentecostal, evangelical, all across the board. And but one thing that unites Christians from all these different stripes and backgrounds are some very basic bread and butter fundamental creeds. And so I actually created a resource for the kids. So I created a very quick and easy website that, because everyone's got their smartphones that they can pull out. So we pull out the Apostles' Creed and we read that together as a way of this is something that transcends all of our various denominations and differences as part of the practice of worship, of being together, is going through this creed together. And then we use this. There's a link to take us to the daily lectionary. So we can go in there and see, okay, these are the texts from Scripture that Christians all around the world from all different backgrounds and denominations are reading, and it changes every single day. And so here's a quick and easy way with our smartphones to digitally say, okay, what's the gospel reading for today? What's the epistle reading, the Psalm, the Old Testament, and so on. So what we do for the center of gravity of our time together is do the gospel reading for the day. And so we'll read that. So that's one way I incorporate technology in that setting. Go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say that's related to what Sergio was bringing up on the conversation with Craig about that, because Craig, and I would love to in a moment get into your disagreements with I saw you never near those contract.
It was a footnote.
Yeah. Sergio mentioned even if the things that Craig is saying are true, that these things are kind of at odds, like technology and contemplation, that at least we can utilize technology to be able to spread spiritual information, at least. Sure.
And I think even in that context, you had mentioned like there's apps now, right, that can facilitate that and so on. So yeah, absolutely. But then maybe before going down that rabbit hole, to shift gears into the, I don't know, maybe I'll just pause for a moment. Yes. I mean, it was a very small footnote. It was just to exactly that point, this oil and water, that no, technology and spirituality are contrary to one another. It's kind of the knee-jerk posture in many cases, or historic angle in many cases, and that these things distract us and so on. But in as much as human beings are creatures as part of the natural order, or part of creation itself, in the same way that I put in my notes like an example of like a beaver builds a dam, bees build hives, like humans engage with the world, interact with the world, and employ quote unquote technology. And it doesn't have to mean our 21st century electronic devices. Technology takes all manner of different shapes and sizes throughout millennia. And so, these are just tools by which we engage with the world, and they are quote unquote natural. It's not necessarily, it doesn't have to be this opposition of natural and artificial or technological and so on. And so just that as an extension of quote unquote being human, and what it means to be human is to do this. And so even in my own tradition, the Christian tradition, and particularly the Reformed tradition, the Continental Reformed tradition, which is where I come from, there's a huge emphasis on, in the creation story of Genesis, the prototypical couple of Adam and Eve are told to, quote, tend the garden. And so theologians have riffed on this theme of like part of what it means to tend the garden, of being a human being in harmony with the cosmos, is to work it, to work and toil. And so that, which also by extension means work and vocation itself is not bad in the way that our modern culture often has us inhabit a posture toward our work. It's not that work is bad as such, but that gets introduced later as the sweat of your brow after the quote unquote fall of humankind. Then that introduces this attitude toward our work that disassociates us from our work, alienates us from our work, which is a reference to some Marxian language there. But anyway, and that, okay, so now rewinding back and circling to the classroom then, and how do I use technology in the classroom? It's also related to pedagogy and teaching philosophy. So because our students are human beings, they're not just, coming from the Enlightenment and modernity. We've inherited this tradition that tells us that we are fundamentally, to use the language of René Descartes, res cogitans. We are thinking things. And so all of our models and systems and institutions are built on this model of a human being as a thinking thing. And the center of gravity of our human person is our brain and our mind and reason with a capital R and rationality and so on. And so when you only have that model for your pedagogy, well, what does education look like? It looks like a lecture. It looks like information delivery, where you have a teacher, you have a student. The student is an empty container, vessel to receive the input from the teacher. And so that's kind of this model we've inherited. And philosophers and theologians and postmodern philosophers have said, well, not so fast. Is this right? The more we think about these things and the more even our economic models are built on this, right? Like Homo economicus.
Yeah.
And classical liberalism, all of our liberal democracy, liberal capitalism, all these things are built on this. That our economic transactions are built on voluntary informed transactions and so on.
By atomized individuals.
By atomized individuals, the buffered self, as Charles Taylor put it in his Secular Age and so on.
Which, of course, informs how we do grading and all these things. Yeah.
Exactly right? And so instead saying, okay, what is a different model of human persons? Not just as these res cogitans thinking things, not just as these atomized individuals, but as holistic beings, as multifaceted, multisensory beings, as social, as relational beings. And so generally that's true for all of our HPRSS classes, where we do, okay, let's do a seminar discussion instead of a lecture. So we're going to have dialogue, we're going to have conversation, and then also incorporating multimedia. And what does that look like? And using these tools where we can all right, now let's run an audio clip, or let's see a video clip, and even pulling that up even in the middle of a conversation and to facilitate. So things like that.
Yeah.
And then what I do in my contemporary issues class is I rewind us 2,000 years and we read Plato's Allegory of the Cave.
Ah, nice.
And it's specifically to get into some epistemological themes. But in order to do a really fun launch pad right at the beginning of class, we also watch The Matrix
Nice.
with Keanu. So
have you ever seen the director's cut, like the commentary, the DVD commentary?
No, I haven't.
You know who does it?
Who?
Ken Wilber.
Oh, that's right.
But they talked about it.
I heard him on
thing,
the
right?
exactly
Yeah.
on the podcast.
Yep.
And so so we watch The Matrix, and then we read Plato, and that just helps them draw the connections and see, because why are we reading this 2,000-year-old text in a class called Contemporary Issues? Because it's so relevant, and the fact that The Matrix is all it is a retelling of it. And then what I do is speaking of technology in the classroom, when we read Plato's Allegory of the Cave, as you know, it's in the form of a dialogue, so there's different characters speaking to one another. So I even formatted the PDF. I have a classic version they can read if they just want the OG, just read it. But then I also created a version with text bubbles. So it's like they're texting each other. And so the kids, just to help facilitate a little bit, like how they can get into a text and read a text. And so this dialogue that they're reading has the little colored bubbles of a text message.
Is it like unabridged? Like you took the whole thing and put it just into
text bubbles.
How did you go about? What did the process of making that look like?
Oh, I just pulled up Microsoft Word, and there were some quick tools to create a little bubble. And so I took the text, I copy and pasted the text into a blank document. I used like 3 different translations, and I kind of mixed and matched different parts. And then I did these quick word bubbles and just put them on there, formatted it so it looked pretty clean and looked kind of like a text like you'd read on your phone. So, and the kids like it. Every term I take a poll and I say, okay, who read the normal, who read? And I've had it go heavily one direction, heavily the other, 50-50. It surprises me. I always thought it would be either 50-50 or more on the text bubbles. But one term I did have more students read the classic version, which was very interesting to me. So it's kind of all over the map.
Yeah.
But that's an example of technology in the classroom.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah. Pedagogy.
Do they have any issues like literally being on the same page when they're like, oh, on page 33 XYZ?
Right. I think I know what I did. I put line numbers. So there's
great.
page numbers as well as line numbers.
Sweet.
So then they can reference. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Oh, man. So cool.
Yeah. I'll send it to you. It's fun.
Please. So are they like colored?
Yes.
With,
yeah.
Now, I know
I know where you're going. I know
Blue
where
or
you're
green?
going. Yeah, exactly. Blue and green. What did I do? I think I sidestepped that whole debate and I made it like blue and gray or something. I actually did try to color match like whatever a real conversation would look like.
when I'm texting with another person who has an iPhone, it's blue and gray.
Yes.
But with you,
Yes, it's blue.
it's green. Green and gray.
You outed me.
Yep.
You outed
Busted.
me.
Don't worry. We won't tell Dr. Curtis.
I have a Samsung and I've had both. I've had both and I like both.
Hey, we allow people to play with the toys they want to play with.
That's right.
You know what? On that note, this is maybe a bit of a gear shift, but
Sure.
it's all related. So I've noticed you on more than one occasion unlocking Justice's gaming system.
Yes.
So I wanted to ask you a broader question about. And sorry, contact Justice is your son, who's how old?
He's 13. Yes.
As a parent, in addition to we talk a little bit about being a teacher and being a director of spiritual life in this community, just like on the personal level as a parent, what kind of things do you do to ensure that you and your kids are living well amidst all of this technology that's thrown at us?
Yeah. So this was huge. Even getting phones, right? Like, because kids are always like, when can I get my phone? And 10-year-olds are asking phones, or even have all phones. Like my young kids, come home and their peers already have phones in elementary school. And, admittedly, nowadays with a lot of the spooky stuff with school shootings and stuff like that, I can appreciate a parent wanting a direct line of communication. So I don't think it has quite the, it used to be the case, why would you have a kid have that? I can appreciate that. But yeah, so the teenagers wanting the phones. And so we had, my son did just get a phone. I think our pivot point was when they went to a new school such that it warranted the need for a line of communication like that. And step one is even having a phone. A whole another conversation is then when do you introduce social media and when they're allowed to have that. And so I have a setup with parental pins on my kiddos' devices, my younger kiddos. And I have them. Okay, I have a little list of like, okay, well, let's make sure we have these well-rounded kids who read every day, do their homework every day, do all these types of things, and then they're allowed to. Okay, Dad, can I have my pin on my device? So, so that's what I do. Is
I have witnessed that exact maneuver. I was telling Grace earlier today, like I like doing there. He's like, make sure that all the chores are done.
Yep.
And then,
yep,
you're in.
Your room is tidy. You've done your homework for the day. You've got some reading in for the day, and it varies like summertime and school year. And I try to be sensible with it. But then then unlock their devices. Let them have some fun.
Are there any time limits that you set?
Yes and no. Not hard limits, but functionally with the rhythms of life, it comes out to having some limits. And funny enough, when I first moved to Choate, because we only just moved to campus this year, I have my kiddos have lots of different devices and computers and so on. And I actually reached out to the IT department and I said, hey, do we do some kind of measure of parental locks? Because when I was at home before moving to campus, I could set that up all myself with the router and parental protections and stuff for content and the World Wide Web and so on. So I had that set up on all my kiddos' devices. And the IT team actually said to me, you're the only person that has ever asked us this, ever. I was like, oh, okay. But so it is possible for anyone who's curious that it's possible they can hook you guys up. But anyway, so that's another thing that I've done just, because I am young enough that I grew up in this ecosystem of the internet and everything. I'm just cognizant, of the ways that it is healthy and helpful to protect our kiddos in this whole ecosystem.
Yeah, I think we're just about the same age, right?
Yeah, I'm 37 now.
37. Okay.
Yeah.
Got a couple years on me, but
Yeah.
I'm freshly 35.
Yeah, we are both now boomers, as the kiddos say, right?
But we have a very important role, not to like toot our horns here, but in helping, not to again sound boomerish, but to help guide these kids. But seriously, there's this generation does not know what life ever was like before having an always on device on your person.
That's right.
24/7, just always
and that vibrates and allures you and pulls you when you're trying to live your life, right? And it's conditioning you. My daughter just got back from summer camp, and they had a rule at the camp. Hey, you're at camp. No phones, no devices. Put it away. And so if you want to take photos, pack a camera.
Nice.
And she loved it. She said it was great. It was awesome. She had the time of her life. 10 out of 10. It was awesome. So, yeah, I mean, and she even did remark, it's a shame that the smartphones have become all-in-one devices with our music and our photography and all these things now, because it's kind of nice just having a camera so you can take photos without all that other crap pulling at you.
Yep.
So, yeah, that's exactly right.
It's so true. It's so true. And that kind of thing has informed why we got this device that you were checking out before.
Right.
I'm holding up because obviously we don't have cameras in here, but there's this little tablet called Remarkable. And it uses e-ink just like Kindle.
Yep.
You get a little pencil with it, and it's very simple and basic. It does not have apps and features and all these things. It's just, it's like a pen and paper.
Yep.
Except it's digital, which allows you to do some basic, like you can move things around.
Right.
Cut and paste and these kind of things. And then it does sync with other devices. So you can even though it's not color on the display, you can tell it to do a highlight in yellow or blue or red or whatever, and it'll show up as gray on the thing itself. But when you look at it on a synced device with color screen, it has that color in it. But the key thing is just that even I, who I'm very intentional about having do not disturb on and not having apps that I don't want to use on my home screen, and I even disable the app suggestion thing. So when I pull down, it's like,
no, don't tell me what you think I want. Let me look for what I want.
But even despite all these things, which some of which were tips by Tristan Harris, the main guy behind the Social Dilemma, he has some great suggestions for how to kind of keep sane amidst everything. Despite still doing all those things, I still find it difficult to sit down. Oh, I got my iPad Pro, great, and I have the pencil. It's wonderful. And it's so powerful and capable. But all of the other things are on here. So even if I'm not even getting a notification, there's something in the back of my mind that's like, it knows that this is the same portal.
Yes, bingo.
Into everything else that's actually a distraction.
Right.
When all I really want to do is sit down
and do my MO that I'm working on. And these developers and these corporations, they want to lure you in. They want to distract you. Like their business model and their profit generation depends on them distracting you from what you're trying to use your iPad for, and instead looking at our app, right? That's literally the goal. And so it's not to be useful. It's not to be for your purposes. It's for our purposes. It's for, yes, exactly.
Now,
profit.
Oh man, you're touching on a huge topic here. I've really been wanting to hear more of your thoughts about this. This is something I think about all the time. Just observing the change in, overall mental health and well-being in students over the past decade or so since I've been in this line of work. Like how do you think that what you just described, the nature of the information economy and how it operates on us, what, in your opinion, are the spiritual effects of that?
Ooh, this is very interesting. Yeah, so like a huge thing that's been documented and talked about is social media and depression with adolescents, teens and adolescents, right? And self-image and before that, even before we had these new tools and everything in our pocket and social, we still, even then we talked about magazine covers and billboards and commercials and advertising, right? And the way that these images are held up for people to live up to. And interestingly, I saw an article recently, and I didn't dig terribly deep into this, but you know, classically with depression, there can be any number of different causes, but one that frequently is pointed to is, hey, this isn't always just a life circumstance thing. It can also be a brain chemical thing and chemical balance. There's this very provocative article that came out, it was peer reviewed, that said, actually, some of the data behind that was a little fast and loose and profit driven. And many, many, many billions of dollars have been made on this model of the answer to these things being pharmaceuticals and drugs and things. And actually, there can be other things. And I've even said this myself to get a little bit more to your point with the spiritual angle on this when talking with students and people generally when navigating these things. It's good to have a broad toolbox and you need the right diagnosis, proverbially speaking, to have the right prescription. So what, in fact, is the cause of something? But even looking at, the spiritual angle, right? Like thinking, okay, so how am I orienting myself to the world, and how are the institutions that I'm in moving me and nudging me in certain ways? And so anyway, having this broader picture than just what has become the kind of go-to prescription. I hate to use the word prescription because it's literally prescription in this case with drugs and stuff. But the go-to answer for these things being like, oh, here, take 2 of these a day and give us a call in the morning. Well, wait a minute. Let's do some more contemplation. Let's do a little bit more deep thinking and reflection on circumstances and things that are leading us to this. I got down this rabbit trail specifically on depression with kids and devices. But the question was a little more broad than that. But that's the direction my intuition went, was with like depression and stuff. Yeah. Trying to remember if that was the breadth of it, but.
No, that's great. That's great. Yeah. I think we're just starting a little snowball here because, what you point to is endemic of the stuff you were speaking about earlier with just the values of modernism, modernity, and stuff. Mm-hmm. And this is where Ken Wilber's 4 quadrants model is very helpful. And actually, by the way, that book, that Education in a Time Between Worlds book. That is based on one of the first pages there. It has the 4 quadrants map on there. So this Sackstein actually he basically uses Ken Wilber's integral theory as like the framework for, hey, if we want to radically reform education, we need to do it with this as like a foundational piece. Interesting. So somewhere in the first essay, there's a 4 quadrants thing, but it essentially divides reality into the 2 axes are individual and collective. So the x-axis is individual and collective. Yep. And the y-axis is individual and collective. Okay, and the x-axis is interior. Oh yeah. And exterior. Yeah, interesting. So what you pointed to with the way that we treat depression and things is with this chemical thing. It's an upper right quadrant thing. It's like, you have a brain chemical. Your physical brain has some chemical imbalances, so we're gonna put some different chemicals in. To change the bag of chemicals, and then you're good to go because that's all you are. It's just a bag of. Exactly. So one of my professors, he has this. Oh goodness, I forget the name of. It's a whole trilogy of books, cultural liturgies series. Desiring the Kingdom is what the title is, and he also belonged to the Christian tradition, so that's what some of that language is related to. But he has this axiom, and it's related to this point that we're talking about, where he says, underneath every pedagogy, every pedagogical model, is an anthropology, a model of human persons. And this gets to exactly what we were talking about earlier. This modernist model of
humans as rational, or in this case, humans as bag of chemicals, right? Like, versus what is an alternate model? What is a rival model? And in his case, he says, instead of, he again, coming from the Christian tradition, he uses the language of homo liturgicus. And he argues that the center of gravity of the human person is not the brain, but instead the proverbial heart, the gut, this way that we live and move in the world. We think we can rationalize our things after the fact, but often it's desire that drives us. Now, here's the thing. Advertisers and marketers know this. This is not new information. They discovered this 50, 75 years ago. They said, wait a minute. When we're selling a product, instead of having this pro and con list of here's why our product is better than our competition, blah, blah, blah. No, they learned a long time ago, no, we need to tap in at a deeper level. We need to bypass the frontal cortex and get into the deeper root of where humans really do their true decision making. So there's this old documentary that PBS Frontline made called The Persuaders. And this is before social media and now what we call quote unquote big data, which is this same phenomenon on hyperdrive. But back in the day, so they have this, in this documentary, they interview the marketers, they interview the folks who do this stuff. And they're actually straightforward and unapologetic about it. There's one dude who said, back in the day in this industry, all you had to do was match the color scheme of your ad campaign and all this stuff. But now we have to come up with a worldview for people.
Yes.
And so he says, and here's what he says. He says, we studied a few different demographics on this. We studied Volkswagen consumers and said, why do you choose a Volkswagen? And they would say, there's just something about it where we're Volkswagen people. Like this, it came with this identity. Apple, right? And there's even this ad campaign back in the day of, well, I'm a Mac, I'm a PC.
You
with
remember
John
those
Hodgman?
ones? Yeah.
Right?
That was a great ad campaign.
Yes, and very effective. And the blue bubble and the green bubble, right? People associate, there's value built into this. There's identity packed into it. And this particular gentleman they were interviewing, he said he even coined a term for this, and using the classic language of trademarks. He called them love marks, where we're trying to capture people and what they love and harness that and funnel it into their product. And he said, additionally, not only did they study these demographic groups, they studied religious groups and spiritual groups and even cults. And he said, how do we harness this devotion? This is the language he used, this devotion beyond reason, because that's what it is. They know, human beings, we like to pat ourselves on the back that we're so rational and reasonable, and that's how we make our decisions and navigate the world. They know better. They know that that's bullcrap. That we are not res cogitans. We are homo liturgicus. We are driven by what we love, by what we value. This is where our rudder is for navigating the world. So the marketers, they've known this for a long time, but we as educators, we as the boomers that are guiding the next generation, we have to similarly be savvy and cognizant of this, so how do we steer and teach and orient and, from a spiritual life angle, disciple our students and move them and form them in the ways that they navigate the world.
Yeah, well put. And I'm really excited for you to dive more into this integral theory stuff, that book and that overall framework, because it honors just like essentially developmental psychology at kind of at the core of which many different people, Piaget is probably one of the more famous, especially in educational circles, acknowledging that we develop individually and collectively through stages of consciousness. And so you were referring to, when you were talking about the rationality and stuff, that is a capacity that we do have.
Yes.
It's not like
that's one of our tools.
Yes, right.
It's one of our tools in our toolbox.
That's in spiral dynamics and in integral theory, like they talk about, so these all have colors. So that would be labeled as orange level.
Okay.
That comes after amber, which is like kind of ethnocentric oriented, and like in-group out-group dynamics are so at play.
Sure.
And then you see these at play like throughout history too. So it's like that step into orange, that was the Western Enlightenment. It was like, the individual does matter, and we like the thinking atomized individual is a real thing that's how we conceived of the idea of universal human values, like from stepping out of the the
tribal.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
But there's levels before that are like, archaic and mythic and magic and
Interesting.
and then like, your ego starts building, but then that's red. And then after ego, you have after red, then is the amber. So it's like kind of like a collective ego.
Yes.
And it's as you keep going, it's this interesting interplay between the individual and the collective, where it's like the collective, there's the individual at the ego level, then the collective based on that, like expanding the ego to the group. Then an individual comes to stand outside of that and it's like, oh, no, we have rationality and like, let's think about this. Then you have green beyond that, postmodern, where it's comes back more into groups in certain ways, where it's like, hey, we have these great universal human values, but they have not been equitably distributed. So equity is like a huge, value in the postmodern green worldview kind of thing. But we see all of these conflicts out there are largely at this current stage of the game between amber, orange, and green, where you have like amber, a lot of your conservative people, and then like orange has people on the left and the right kind of in there, and then green largely your progressive kind of people.
Right.
But then people talking green can like do that in a way that's actually very, very amber and red.
Yes.
At its core, like it can be an us versus them,
absolutely,
right? And an ego identity building thing, right?
Huge.
So this is all getting to the point of our role as educators, helping people to once we're able to observe that all of those are real stages of development. That's making what Wilber would refer to as the jump from first tier cognition into second tier, and the nature of first or second tier is that when you're in any of those first tier levels. You basically only see the world through your current state,
vantage
cutting
point.
edge state of development, right?
Yeah.
And often tend to kind of have shadow material about the levels you came up from, because you're kind of ashamed of like, well, that's not me, and then you project out, right? But once you go into this second tier space, you're able to honor and realize that each of these levels, this is a holarchy. Each level transcends and includes. So it's it includes the good stuff, but also transcends the stuff that you kind of like need to grow out of.
Yeah.
So just by starting to think about the interplay between those different levels of consciousness and acknowledging that we actually have them all innate in us, you're already kind of occupying some of that second tier space. And that people like Zach Stein, he wrote a whole book about how it is a moral imperative for us to bring people along to this. You can call it whatever you want. It sounds a little pretentious saying second tier, but
sure.
But like that mode of consciousness where you acknowledge that we are multifaceted beings and we can operate in a rational mode, in an irrational mode. But once you are cognizant of it, you're less likely to be mindlessly pulled in to this whole consumer game, which all of the incentives, as you pointed out, are to continue to actually stir things up and pit people against each other and to create more chaos. And then more strife, and then people need it's just this vicious cycle where it's like people then feel all the pain and the hurt and then they need to like ameliorate it by ultimately perpetuating more of that.
Absolutely. It sounds like he's doing based on your description, a very similar thing. He's trying to rethink pedagogy based on this different anthropological model, saying like, this is what human persons are, this is how they develop, this is what we see, and now let's be cognizant of that in our educational models, right? Let's actually, very interesting.
And I mean, just just having the smallest taste of that kind of stuff in the context of moral reason and spiritual journeys, but like we were able to, in those 10 weeks in moral reasoning, have conversations that kids said they had never been able to have before with friends or family, where they broke new ground and actually figured out how to like come to some degree of harmony on things that they thought were like complete polar opposites. And I feel a little sheepish about sharing this, but I have one student in particular who remarked that 10 weeks did more for his well-being and personal development than all of the years of professional therapy he had been to up to that point.
Wow. Exactly. Bro, this is okay. So this is what I'm talking about. This is exactly related to your point earlier about when I started riffing on depression and having this holistic model that says, look, this isn't the only prescription to give based on this. Like, let's think deeper. Let's dig harder and see, and ask the hard questions of like the meaning of life and our orientation and our goals and our aspirations and the things that are moving us this way or that and feeding us different goals and rival goals and the degrees to which we've internalized all of that, right? Like, absolutely.
I'm so glad you said holistic, because that can be a word that I think can probably be kind of like dismissed by people in certain stages of development.
Yep.
And just automatically associate it with like all like woo hippie stuff, whatever. But it's very important to actually try to conceive of things in a holistic way. That's why I mentioned this model is a holarchy. Because each successive level, and this is why it's so difficult to even start talking about this with people who are very firmly in green stage, because that stage typically is just anti all hierarchy. So they see hierarchy, like, oh no, that's terrible. Like people must be getting oppressed from this, right? But that's a dominator hierarchy. Dominator hierarchies, the higher you go up, the more exclusive it is.
Yeah, sure.
And it's based on exclusion and separation.
Yeah.
A holarchy, each successive level you go up, the more whole it becomes and the more inclusive it becomes.
Fascinating.
So each of those levels, because it transcends and includes, you're creating a greater and greater whole at the individual and the collective level. And ultimately up to, God or whatever you want to say.
Right. Sure.
Which all these, mystical traditions will say that. Oh, and I think you wrote this in some of your notes here about the immanence and transcendence.
Sure.
Like we all are that witnessing awareness or whatever you want to call it. Like that's at our deepest core. We share something that is very special. That is consciousness.
Yep. Yeah, and to use the language of my own tradition in the Hebrew scriptures, the imago Dei, that human beings are created in the image of God, and this kind of gets at some of that language that you were getting at with like the immanence and transcendence, and how humans have this in common with one another, and for some traditions with God as well. Yeah. Absolutely.
And like that's why, at least in my classes, I'm trying to do my small part. Kids are required to meditate as part of the classes.
Yep.
With no particular tradition, and they can use whatever kind of like app or YouTube videos or whatever that they want. I give them some suggestions across a few different traditions, but as long as you're getting to that place inside yourself that opens you up, opens your heart up to other people, and to honestly, first and foremost, to your own true nature. Because if you're not doing that as a starting point, then you will bring in all of the various anxieties and fears and everything into your interactions with other people and perpetuate this strife that we are so tired of.
Yeah, no, I've done something very similar in my Peace and Justice class, which is a world religions class that studies world religions, but then particularly takes the angle of activists and thinkers and folks who've done social action related to their various religious traditions. But I created a new final assignment, and I do similar to what you said, like, having students meditate in class or something. I intentionally took a kind of experimental angle, scientific angle, hands-on learning angle with this world religions class in two ways. One, for the final assignment, I have them do an ethnography assignment where they we've been studying these different world religions, these different traditions, but now let's do some field work. Let's go to an actual space where there are adherents of this tradition. You can choose whatever tradition you want. Maybe it's a tradition that your own family history has some affiliation with. Maybe it's totally new and different. Maybe it's something that you are even personally interested in after having studied in the classroom and so on. And they have to go, and as an ethnographer, they have to they can't be a fly on the wall observer. They have to be a participant observer in the space. Nice. And so doing some hands-on learning here. My wife teaches science and talks about how in the science class, you don't just talk about science, you do science. Pull out the beakers, pull out the magnifying glasses. Right. And so similarly, hey, let's engage this stuff substantively. And so, I've had students, and so they have to write a reflection afterward with their field notes. And students have remarked that this was just a very helpful and extraordinary assignment, not only at an intellectual level of learning, but at an existential level of just even whether it's their tradition or not. I've had kids who do not belong to this tradition, but nevertheless, this was really downright moving in some cases. And then so similarly to what you mentioned, after I do the introduction and orientation to all the various world religions, similarly, I've said, all right, now let's take, 90 seconds or 2 minutes or whatever. And let's pick a tradition, whatever it was we've learned about, and let's just take a moment. And whether it's a prayer or whether it's meditation or whatever it may be, whatever form it may take, let's experiment. Let's do some hands-on learning. Let's think about the claims that are being made across these traditions and try to engage a little bit. It's fun. It's interesting. The kids like it. They've responded well. It's been good.
Yeah, man. Do you think that it's possible to honor the, separation of church and state thing, yet also more consciously and intentionally incorporate this kind of spiritually grounded education into our school culture or just the way that we do school in general? Because this is kind of circling back again to your very, I think, apt diagnosis of the alienation that results from a strict kind of modernist, materialist, really much that rationalist, that orange level. That has informed the way that we have done school, which was a change. It wasn't always that way, but that's right. How it's been for a few hundred years.
That's exactly right.
And clearly people are suffering from it. And we've both on our own had very promising results. Of course, we actually do teach classes in
this discipline. That's right, in this field.
But kids consistently say this should be a required class for all the shows. And we're talking about kids who are avowed atheists coming in and are
right.
Oh wow, I actually get that this is actually very practical.
Absolutely.
So have you ever thought about
I do. I think what comes to my mind immediately is the difference between North America, by which I mean both the United States and Canada, versus a place like France. And you still have this, like you said, this quote unquote separation of church and state. But the difference is the implementation and execution of a secularist model like we see in France versus a pluralist model like we see in North America. And I like this pluralist model that creates a space for this. This is why I like that spiritual life here at Choate, for example, falls under the E&I team, the equity and inclusion team. That look, this is not accidental to our humanity. It is constitutive of our humanity. And it's constitutive of our identity, of how we navigate the world. And so this isn't, I had a student my first year here we had some good conversations and he was graduating and he was so grateful for our conversations and the way I was trying to nudge things, because he said, I've been here and I felt like I just had to partition this part of my life, my spirituality. It's so deep and core to who I am, but I just had to keep it to myself and don't talk about it. And by contrast, no, look, you're Jewish, you're Muslim, I'm Christian. We all come from these different traditions, and let's celebrate that. That's just part of the warp and woof of life. That's not something that we have to. The secularist model says you have public reason and private faith, and it's this very individualized, very interiorized angle to our faith and spirituality. And so in France, in the most extreme form, what does that look like? Where women can't wear headscarves in public. It's actually banned. You literally cannot practice your religion and practice your faith. And by contrast here, the pluralist model that says, no, like we have our different traditions, and we live with and among one another, and we appreciate that this is part of who we are. And that weaving together of our traditions is precisely what makes us stronger. Instead of a watering down of our sensibilities and trying to appeal to a kind of lowest common denominator, it's instead an embracing and enriching model that honors the integrity of our different traditions. And I've said the same thing for our chaplain team, saying, hey, look, we're not, the goal isn't to water down any of our various respective traditions. It's to dive deeper into our traditions. The kids come from all over the world, and they're coming to our spiritualized spaces of practice, and it's not a lowest common denominator model. It is a let's dive into the deep end model, and we can do that alongside one another and in partnership with one another, in harmony with one another together. And so, yeah, I think that pluralist versus secularist model. And so, yeah, to whatever degree that looks like here at Cho, even in something as simple as our prayers at graduation, which it can feel nowadays like a kind of old time tradition that we've inherited from the past. But once again, I'm so grateful is part of this E&I umbrella that says, no, we have this as part of what we do. But I always preface it by saying, hey, whatever tradition you belong to, whatever this looks like for you, I invite you to join alongside me according to your own tradition. And let's pray together. And so inhabiting that posture as it relates to these things. Yeah.
Yeah. Love it.
Yeah.
Have you ever read The Perennial Philosophy by Aldous Huxley?
So I'm familiar with Huxley, but I've read nothing. I've read none of his actual substantive literature, but I'm familiar with some of what he's trying to draw attention to. But I'm going to be terrible.
I think you'll like that book. Add it to this spiritual life bookshelf.
Yes,
because it's all about trying to find the common core of the great mystical traditions. So he takes quotations from all these different spiritual
traditions
texts and then like analyzes them and put in every chapter is full of quotations from all the different traditions, but focusing on a certain theme.
Yes.
So like grace and free will is one chapter, and like here's these quotes from
yes,
put them all together with his kind of meta commentary. But he was actually part of the Vedanta Society of Southern California, along with Alan Watts. So interesting. I actually did not know that he or Alan Watts were part of that. When I read Brave New World, back in high school. And then Doors of Perception in 2011 or 2012 or so. But that was it until more recently I stumbled upon the Perennial Philosophy and also The Divine Within, which is just a collection of essays, which is wonderful as well.
Interesting.
And it's very much all about, contemplative practice, finding the divine.
It's so interesting because the only encounter I've had with Huxley is contrasting him with Orwell. Right.
Oh, right. You sent me that great comment or graphic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
From Neil Postman's book, Amusing Ourselves to Death. And he contrasts the kind of authoritarian model of Orwell with Brave New World of Huxley, which appears it's a libertarian model, but they're both dystopian. Yeah. And all of that to say, I'm more familiar with Huxley in that kind of political philosophy angle versus this more contemplative spirituality angle. So it's very interesting.
Yeah, I think I know it's probably not on the horizon for this school year because it's starting up, but at some point I would love to chat about that with you because he's so dialed in to like and then it helps you understand to new depths like the others like his novels more. It's like
interesting.
Wow,
yeah,
okay, so
totally.
he was deeply
because he makes explicit what is implicit.
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting.
In your notes from previous TECcast episodes, you had a little note about contemplation, Eastern emptiness versus Hebrew fullness.
Oh yeah.
Is there anything that you wanted to expand upon that?
It's a very minor. I've heard meditation contrasted with two different models of an Eastern model and a Hebrew Semitic model, where in the Eastern model, meditation is about emptying oneself. It's about emptying the mind, emptying the self of distraction, and trying to dive deep into an inner core type of sensibility. In contrast to the Hebrew model, and exemplified in the Hebrew scriptures, which is more of a filling. It's instead of an emptying, it's like it's taking the word of God, the law, the Torah, and meditating and chewing on it. And the psalmist says, I meditate on your law day and night. It is a delight to me, and so on. And so that was a footnote in there that I just had about two different models and ways of thinking of meditation, of one model that has an emptying, but one that is a filling, and how they're just very different. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
But also ultimately, there's traditions that talk about like the empty fullness. Like it is.
Interesting.
I mean, reality in the unmanifest form is what. Anytime you're talking about like ultimate reality and really getting at it, it's gonna come out in the form of it's gonna sound paradoxical.
Sure.
And that's why there's all these Zen koans and stuff that are like pitting these things. It's like, wait, how do those go together? Well, because they are. It is emptiness and form are one. Samsara and nirvana are one. All these things are ultimately one at the end of the day. But since we live in the manifest realm of the many, like and when we try to communicate about things, we use words which are inherently dualistic. We're going to, when we're really trying to get at what's most true, we're going to say things that sound contradictory.
We're gonna run into the limits of language.
Yes,
right. And
that's where you get to. You were talking about pre-rational earlier.
Yeah.
I meant to say this earlier. Don't forget what we were about to say. But like with that second tier thing, that's where. So it's like pre-rational, then orange and green are like rational, but then trans-rational.
Oh,
that's what Ken Wilber's whole
yeah.
thing is all about. Is like honoring that we actually have this trans-rational realm where it's not. And this is where people who are super like dialed into the whole like new atheist thing, and they're just so dismissive of anything that reeks of spirituality. They're just religion. Like they equate it with that childish storytelling about stuff. Where, you're just making up something to make you feel good. No. We're talking about people for thousands of years have had direct experience of these realms of consciousness that they're fully capable of rational thing, like fully formed adults who then will go into a meditative state and experience this glory that is beyond.
Right.
Rational.
It's so reductive, right? It's so, I mean, yes, it's very interesting. You don't hear about this much anymore nowadays with the new atheist phenomenon, but it was so huge, like, 10, 15 years ago.
Yep.
And I remember one commentator describing it as the last dying gasp of modernity.
Oh, yeah.
Because as post-modernity is reintroducing this incredulity and so on toward these abstractions, you don't hear about it as much anymore. But you're exactly right. Like this kind of self-congratulatory modernist model of the onward march of reason and progress. And we kind of put away these old, I love Star Trek. I adore Star Trek.
Yeah.
And you see this, like this is part of that, especially the Jean-Luc Picard with his Patrick Stewart, right? That's his character. But this is latent in there. It's like, we put away the old religions and myths of back in the day, but the sequel shows in the series actually have become postmodern. And they actually revisit religion and science and faith. Anyway, that's an excursus on some of these themes. But new atheism, there can be this reductive dismissal. And the postmodern philosophers, even quote unquote non-religious philosophers, even atheist philosophers, Derrida, Foucault, all these guys will say, look, I don't believe in religion XYZ, but I'm also aware enough not to think I don't have commitments and beliefs and presuppositions and a worldview. This kind of this idea that I have neutral, objective reason that some of these modernist type of philosophers and thinkers have, wanted to build on. we now know, no, this doesn't match with reality. This doesn't track.
Yeah.
And so, anyway, there's a little excursus on the new atheists, but to your point about paradox.
Yes.
I mean, this is true, right? Across traditions, exactly like you said, that once you are trying to speak of transcendence, you hit the limits of language. And there's whole fields of philosophy, in epistemology. How does the noumena match how does the phenomena correspond to the noumena? And Kant, how does the mind, is the mind a mirror of nature with the modernists? There's so much dialogue of how do we know what we think about matches reality and so on. And even in philosophy of language with the Ludwig Wittgenstein and some of these guys talking about how we inhabit the categories of our language, create functionally the world and the concepts as we understand them and think about them. But even in my own tradition, in Christianity, at the deepest core level, when thinking about God, the bedrock, the end all be all, even God, according to the Christian tradition, is three and yet one. This Trinity. We had to invent a word. Tri-unity, right? Trinity, right. To get at this idea that there's one God, but nevertheless three persons. And similarly with the person of Jesus, that Jesus is not half God and half human, but fully God and fully human. Like these models that just break down when we try to, because we're talking about transcendence, we're talking about metaphysical. And that's what gets interesting as well with some of the new atheists, is there's this fundamental categorical error where when you're talking about metaphysics, it is literally, by definition, even built into the vocab itself, the etymology, we're talking about that which is beyond physics. Right. It's metaphysics. But yet this posture of the new atheist that can be so reductive, it says, no, we have the tools of science and reason that can explain everything in all of reality. And this is all there is. This is the end all be all. And it's like, look, the example I give with the students in the religious studies classes is this. I say, you don't use a thermometer to measure distance. You're using the wrong tool in the toolbox. Right. And if someone says, do you like the smell of the color 7? Right? Like you've just mixed across two different axes. Like the 7 is not a color and you don't smell colors, right? So these are fundamental categorical errors. And so it's just funny. And some of these guys weren't even philosophers anyway, right? Dawkins is a geneticist. And I'm evidently in genetics, he's great, right? When you do your field, I'm all about it, bro. It's great. But once you step out of that, it's like, this is a little sophomoric,
Yeah, well, exactly. There is ironically, a very emotional attachment to this idea of pure objectivity and reason. Yes. And you sense that when you try to really tease these things out, get very insecure about, I remember what it was like being in that phase of development when I was in high school.
Yes, because it is a faith commitment.
Yeah,
it is a commitment to this as the end all be all. And so, it does get personal. It does get emotional. It does get like, well, wait a minute. It rattles the cage a little bit. Absolutely.
Your identity is being questioned.
Yeah. It's a worldview thing. It's a values thing. And not only emotionalism and stuff can get caught up into it, but unfortunately, there's an unsavory dark side to it as well, because this was in the wake of 9/11 when this was getting big. And so there was Islamophobia in it as well, particularly in the British voices of the new atheism. And so, so there's some of that as well. Absolutely.
Well, this is a perfect transition to the final question that I like to ask people, because music is itself as an art form is occupies this space where, you can have, there's songs with lyrics and things that are using words and I guess that are rational capacities in some sense in that way, but there's this ineffable quality of like the sounds that can, research has now been shown, like can actually fundamentally alter our conscience, put us into trance states and all these things.
Yep.
So we working at a school here, we often have grading and report writing and class planning and stuff to do. So when you know you need to get in that kind of mode, are there any particular types of music that you like to put on that you want to share with the community and spread to the people?
This is funny. So I do have an answer to this, but and it is actually kind of barking up the tree you're describing, but it is not the sophisticated answer some might give of, yes, I play some Bach and Beethoven, or I play some jazz, something. Mine is much less fancy, but nevertheless related. I play Radiohead, and particularly the album OK Computer.
Ooh.
And I bust out the OG, fire it up, play it in the background, put my headphones on when it's time to get down to business. And their music just has a quality to it that does, as you know, it's Radiohead. It's a very experimental, artistic, like very fascinating music. Now, that's the answer that's barking up the tree you're describing. Full disclosure. When I need to get my blood pumping and adrenaline going and plow through a stack of papers is great or something, I have also busted out some Rage Against the Machine.
Nice.
just to get some energy going. And finally, I will give a shout out to I am a product of my time and era. I love punk, pop punk, and
Sum 41.
Some 41. But I like a little edgier stuff. So the album, not their super pop punk popular stuff that put them on the map, but their subsequent material. And the album Does This Look Infected? That's when they shifted from their bubblegum punk style to this kind of like metal infused emo punk rock.
Sweet.
So
I've got to check that out. I think I mentioned to you that I saw Sum 41. Yeah, first
concert. Yeah.
It was either that or Good Charlotte or something back in the day. That was
yes. Back when we had our guitars and our garage band and our high school garage bands. Exactly.
Yep.
Awesome.
Okay, one more thing. In the podcast I had you listen to last night, Kevin Kelly was basically postulating. It's very interesting that he's like, he's this, and I wonder if his views have changed since in the last 15 years since I was recorded. But
yeah.
As a techno optimist, as like technology is good,
right?
Which he was honoring as being a little bit controversial.
Yep.
But then that kind of connect to like one of these questions I asked Craig and Janet, like where do you see the future of technology and humanity going?
Good question. And this is really interesting. So, two things come to my mind. The future of technology in general. I love sci-fi. I'm a total sci-fi nerd. But the movement of transhumanism, of these themes of the singularity, right, and using technology to augment our persons, and even the holy grail of this conversation of being able to upload one's consciousness into some kind of supercomputer or machines and achieve functional immortality, right? Because your consciousness. I see that as a significant conversation that folks are having with technology as it relates to our humanity and going forward. There was another thing that came to my mind related to this. Oh, and it was piggybacking on that interview you sent me with Kelly, and the idea that he said is perhaps controversial, that technology is fundamentally good. And in my notes, I actually put, this is very Augustinian.
Yes.
And I just speaking for myself and my own tradition, I would actually strongly agree with that. And I would say he's exactly right, in as much as technology, again, is not part of a dualism of nature versus civilization, or nature, that which is natural versus artificial, and technology and so on. But if you think of technology as a natural outflow of human being and how we engage with and interact with the world, then technology is it's constitutive to our being human and how we engage with our environment. And again, in my own tradition, in the Christian tradition, the created order upon creation by God is pronounced good, that this is fundamentally good. And which actually does tie to some other themes that had come up in that conversation that you sent me about the relationship of good and evil then, because there is questions, because there's so much of the reaction that technology is evil, inherently evil, or maybe it's neutral. It can be used for good or evil, but Kelly wanted to say, no, it's good. And actually, I do think Christian theology agrees with that sentiment, that actually technology is good in as much as it's constitutive of creation. However, I would also go further that for the Christian model, insofar as we inhabit what theologians will call a broken and fallen world, where we are in disunity with one another, we are in rebellion against our created purposes, that we have introduced this dissonance, and that is also felt and seen in our technology as well. And so technology has hardwired into it purposes, and even in the most extreme version, a quote unquote vision of the good life, eudaimonia.
Yes.
And so, there's the old expression, when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And so similarly, our technology shapes even how we view and interact with the world. And purposes are built into our various artifacts of technology, whatever they may be. And so if you have, whatever technological implements we're using to navigate the world, if it's a CEO in Silicon Valley who wants to keep stuffing his bank account in the Cayman Islands, then they're going to develop technology in a certain way. And when we use and employ that technology, it's going to orient and shape us in certain ways and how we navigate the world in certain ways. There's an interesting quote from Foucault, and I might botch this because I'm recalling it. But he says, we know what we do. We often know why we do what we do. But what we don't always realize is what we do does. And what we do does things, and it has effects on us. It has effects on things around us, and we're not always cognizant of that and aware of it. And the tools that we use and employ, and the institutions we inhabit, and the systems that we inhabit, orient us in certain ways and shape us in certain ways. And to even broaden the scope of this language of technology, our organizations that we have for navigating the world, our economic systems, our legal models of how we organize profit motive, and all manner of different things, they functionally shape our behavior and move us into force. I've heard the language, maybe you've heard of this, I think it was popular in discourse like 10 years ago, the power of the nudge.
Yes.
And so, a pop example of this is a little crass, but like when you go into a men's room and there's a urinal, sometimes they will have a little image of a bumblebee, right? And that's put there because if again, this is a terrible example to be using, but this is the optimal spot, right? For the drain.
Anti-splatter.
Yeah, anti-splatter and drain and so on. So it's this psychological nudge that moves our behavior in a certain way.
Yeah.
And once again, that's built on anthropological models of understanding human personhood.
Right.
That's why we have an entire field and discipline of behavioral economics as functionally a critique of classical economics, because this classical model of Homo economicus that says this is how humans behave and move in the world and how they make transactions. No, we now realize is not true. And we've built our models and systems on this, and it's wrong. So we have behavioral economics that says, okay, what do people actually do? How does this actually work? And surprise, surprise, this is more resonant with some of the postmodern critiques of modernity, but also, perhaps unwittingly, recovering some of the wisdom of the ancients and the ancient traditions. And so even postmodern philosophers like Derrida, they belong to an intellectual tradition that goes through like Heidegger and Pascal and all these types of thinkers who ultimately trace themselves back to St. Augustine and these sensibilities of how we navigate the world. And we can still see that in some of their thinking. So anyway, yes, very, very interesting. That was a pretty long, snaking comment. And I'm trying to remember what the launch pad was.
I love it. It was about like the future of
Oh,
technology
yes,
and humanity and stuff.
yeah.
And I think some of what you were saying was speaking to something that they brought up at a couple points in the conversation of the importance of being ethically grounded when we are making new technologies, because of what you said about thinking about what we do does to other.
Yes. Not only what we do, being cognizant not only of what we do, but what we do does.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Oh man, I also just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge that you didn't say this word, but I was thinking, some of these like postmodern thinkers and stuff, people might use the word like radical to describe some of their ideas. The word radical literally means root.
Correct.
So of course it's coming full circle to like
That's
ancient
exactly
wisdom.
Right. And funny enough, some of my very, very favorite theologians and philosophers belong to a school that is called radical orthodoxy.
Oh.
And what they are doing is using postmodern philosophy and wedding it to an Augustinianism, this kind of fundamental Augustinian bread and butter. That's hence the orthodoxy. But they're very cutting edge postmodern thinkers. It's very interesting.
Wow.
Yeah. But they intentionally make that point. There was an intentional radical orthodoxy, meaning root, but also radical, and also in its functionally political, economic sense of left sensibilities as a critique of classical liberalism as well. Yeah, super interesting. Yeah,
sweet. Well, radical Reverend Aaron. It's been a great almost couple hours here.
Yeah, it's great.
Thank you so much for joining us. Are there any like final parting words that you wanted to make sure to get out there?
Yeah, I didn't think of anything, but maybe just related to our conversation of thinking seriously about, we look at the stats, we look at the trends, and we see it in our classrooms. The waning of religiosity, right, in civilization generally, in the West and so on. There's a trend, but I like that that in this podcast, in this series, you are bringing contemplation to the conversation. And so, taking seriously that there's something about our being human, that this is a part of the human experience. This is why institutions that we aspire our students to go to, like Yale and Harvard and Duke and Princeton, all these institutions have divinity schools, and they're not gone. Like they're still there because this isn't the myth of modernity is not true. This isn't something that we just cast away, like our earlier comments about the new atheists. This isn't something we that this is part of our being human. And so whatever that looks like, just trying to be cognizant of that and tap into that and be aware of that, because as we go forward and as we navigate life, we're going to have different tools in the toolbox, and we're also going to hit hurdles in life, and we need to be aware of the multifaceted nature of our being human and what is constitutive of our humanity, and that this is a big piece of that puzzle. And there are different answers for what that looks like, but let's have a conversation. Let's have a look. Let's do some searching. Let's do some digging. And there's a lot of wisdom from a lot of voices that have come before us, and a lot of extraordinarily intelligent people who inhabit these traditions and help navigate us as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, awesome. Thank you. Great words to end on. Appreciate you coming by, and to be continued, of course.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. Super fun conversation.